The grainy elevator footage shows a young woman stepping in and out of the frame, pressing buttons frantically, hiding in the corner, gesturing at something invisible in the hallway. Her movements are erratic, unexplainable, disturbing. This isn't a horror movie. This is real surveillance footage from the Cecil Hotel in downtown Los Angeles, and the woman in the video, 21-year-old Elisa Lam, would be found dead 19 days after she checked in. But the circumstances surrounding her death would spark one of the internet's most enduring mysteries, a case so bizarre that it continues to baffle investigators, armchair detectives, and conspiracy theorists to this day. On January 26, 2013, Elisa Lam arrived at the Cecil Hotel in Los Angeles. She was a bright, energetic Canadian student from Vancouver, traveling alone down the West Coast as part of an adventure she had been documenting enthusiastically on her blog and social media. Her trip was supposed to be a journey of self-discovery, a chance to explore California's iconic cities and landscapes. She had plans to visit San Diego after Los Angeles, and her family expected regular updates from her travels. Elisa was known for staying in constant contact with her parents, calling them daily to share her experiences and reassure them of her safety. The Cecil Hotel, where Elisa chose to stay, had a reputation that extended far beyond its budget rates and downtown location. Built in 1924 during Los Angeles's rapid expansion, the hotel had once been a jewel of the city, offering luxury accommodations to business travelers and tourists. But as the decades passed and the neighborhood around it deteriorated into Skid Row, the Cecil transformed into something far darker. By the time Elisa checked in, the hotel had become infamous for the tragedies that had unfolded within its walls. The Cecil had witnessed at least 16 deaths since it opened, including numerous suicides, murders, and unexplained fatalities. In 1947, Elizabeth Short, known posthumously as the Black Dahlia, was reportedly seen at the Cecil Hotel bar in the days before her brutal murder, though this connection remains unverified. In 1964, a woman named Goldie Osgood was raped and murdered in her room, her body not discovered for days. Serial killers, Richard Ramirez, the Night Stalker, and Jack Unterweger, had both stayed at the hotel during their respective killing sprees. The building seemed to carry a darkness that seeped into its paint-chipped walls and worn carpets, but Elisa likely didn't know the full extent of the hotel's macabre history when she booked her room through a travel website. She was looking for affordable accommodation in a city known for its expensive hotels, and the Cecil, rebranded partially as Stay on Main in an attempt to shed its notorious reputation, fit her budget. The first few days of her stay seemed uneventful, at least from the outside. She explored the city, took photographs, and continued posting updates about her trip. Then, on January 31st, Elisa's daily phone call to her parents never came. Her mother and father waited by the phone, growing increasingly anxious as hours turned into a full day with no word from their daughter. This was completely unlike Elisa, who had been religious about maintaining contact with her family. When another day passed with continued silence, her parents contacted the Los Angeles Police Department to report their daughter missing. The LAPD took the report seriously, especially given Elisa's reliability in contacting her family and the fact that she was traveling alone in an unfamiliar city. Officers arrived at the Cecil Hotel to investigate, interviewing staff and searching her room. What they found raised immediate concerns. Elisa's personal belongings were still in her room, including items she would never have left behind if she had checked out voluntarily. Her luggage sat unpacked, her phone and other valuables untouched. There was no sign of forced entry, no evidence of a struggle, no indication of what might have happened to her. The hotel staff reported that Elisa had been moved from a shared dormitory room to a private room a few days into her stay. According to some accounts, other guests had complained about her odd behavior, though the specific nature of these complaints remained vague. Some said she was acting strangely, others mentioned she seemed anxious or paranoid, but nothing suggested she was in immediate danger or planning to disappear. Detectives began canvassing the hotel, showing Elisa's photograph to guests and employees, asking if anyone had seen her or noticed anything unusual. The Cecil Hotel, with its 600 rooms spread across 15 floors and long corridors that seemed to stretch endlessly, was a difficult place to search thoroughly. The building had been subdivided over the years, with some floors converted into residential housing for low-income tenants, adding another layer of complexity to the investigation. People came and went constantly, many preferring to remain anonymous, making it challenging to track down potential witnesses. As days turned into more than a week with no sign of Elisa, the police decided to review the hotel's security camera footage. What they found would become one of the most analyzed and debated pieces of video evidence in recent memory. The footage, date-stamped February 1st at approximately 4 o'clock in the morning, showed Elisa entering one of the hotel's elevators alone. But what happened next defied easy explanation. In the video, Elisa enters the elevator and immediately presses multiple buttons on the panel. She appears to be trying to get the doors to close, but they remain stubbornly open. She waits for a moment, then steps to the side of the elevator, pressing herself against the wall as if hiding from someone or something in the hallway. She peers around the edge of the elevator entrance, looking both ways, her body language suggesting fear or caution. Then she steps fully out into the hallway, just out of the camera's view. For several seconds, she remains outside the elevator, and when she reappears, her behavior has shifted dramatically. She steps in and out of the elevator repeatedly, at one point appearing to talk to someone or something that isn't visible on camera. Her hand gestures become animated, almost as if she's having a conversation or argument. She pushes more buttons on the elevator panel, seemingly at random. At one point, she makes strange gestures with her hands, moving them in unusual patterns that some viewers would later compare to a form of sign language or ritualistic movements. The most unsettling part of the footage comes toward the end, when Elisa stands in the hallway just outside the elevator, visible only from approximately the waist down. She appears to be shifting her weight from foot to foot in an odd manner. Then she disappears from view entirely, and the elevator doors finally close. The entire sequence lasts about 4 minutes, and it's profoundly disturbing to watch. Every movement seems off, inexplicable, as if she's responding to stimuli that shouldn't be there. The police made a decision that would change the trajectory of the investigation entirely. They released the elevator footage to the public, hoping someone might recognize Elisa or have information about her whereabouts. The video was uploaded to YouTube and immediately went viral. Within days, millions of people around the world had watched the footage, and the internet exploded with theories about what might have happened to Elisa Lam. The timing was significant. In February 2013, internet sleuthing and true crime discussion forums were reaching new heights of popularity. Reddit, YouTube, and various blogs became hubs for amateur investigators who pored over every frame of the elevator video, analyzing Elisa's movements, debating what might have caused her bizarre behavior, and developing increasingly elaborate theories about her disappearance. Some believed Elisa was running from someone, possibly a stalker or attacker who had followed her to Los Angeles. They pointed to her apparent fear, the way she kept checking the hallway, her attempts to hide in the corner of the elevator. Others suggested she might have been under the influence of drugs, either taken voluntarily or administered without her knowledge. Her erratic movements and unusual hand gestures seemed to support this theory. More sinister theories emerged as well. Some internet users became convinced that Elisa had been possessed by a demonic entity or was experiencing a supernatural encounter, pointing to the hotel's dark history as evidence that something evil resided within its walls. They analyzed her hand movements frame by frame, claiming they matched descriptions of behavior exhibited by people under spiritual attack. The fact that the elevator doors wouldn't close seemed suspicious to these theorists, as if some unseen force was preventing it. Others drew connections to a peculiar game that had gained notoriety online, a supposed Korean elevator ritual that claimed to open a portal to another dimension. According to the game's rules, a person must enter an elevator alone and press a specific sequence of buttons, visiting floors in a particular order. If done correctly, the ritual supposedly transports the person to an alternate reality. Some observers noted that Elisa's button pressing seemed to match parts of this sequence, though this connection was tenuous at best. The theories kept coming, each more elaborate than the last. Some pointed to strange coincidences, like the fact that there was a deadly tuberculosis outbreak in Skid Row at the time of Elisa's disappearance, and the test being used to detect the disease was called Lam Elisa, an apparent reversal of her name. Others noted similarities between Elisa's case and a Japanese horror film called Dark Water, which features a young woman who drowns in a building's water tank and her dark hair floating in the water that comes from the taps. But while the internet spun its theories, the LAPD was conducting a methodical investigation. They interviewed hundreds of people, reviewed hours of additional security footage from around the hotel, and searched the building from top to bottom. They brought in cadaver dogs to help locate Elisa's body if she was still somewhere in the hotel. The dogs showed interest in certain areas, including the hotel's rooftop, but no conclusive evidence was found. The rooftop of the Cecil Hotel was supposed to be secured, accessible only through an alarmed door that required a key. But like many things at the aging hotel, security was inconsistent. Some employees reported that the rooftop door alarm didn't always work, and that guests occasionally found ways to access the roof despite the supposed restrictions. The roof housed the hotel's water tanks, 4 large cylindrical tanks that provided water to the entire building. On February 19, 2013, 19 days after Elisa was last seen, guests at the Cecil Hotel began complaining about the water. Some said it tasted strange, metallic, or sweet, depending on who you asked. Others reported the water was coming out discolored, running black or brown from their taps. The water pressure was low, and some guests noticed the water had a strange smell. Several people mentioned that the water seemed to have particles floating in it. A maintenance worker was sent to investigate the problem. He climbed the ladder to the hotel's rooftop, walked across the tarred surface, and approached the water tanks. The tanks were large, approximately 8 feet tall and 4 feet in diameter, with heavy metal lids that could be removed for servicing. The worker climbed the ladder attached to the side of one tank and looked inside. What he saw would haunt him forever. Elisa Lam's body was floating in the water tank, naked, her clothing and personal items found floating beside her. The worker immediately contacted the authorities, and within hours, the Cecil Hotel became a crime scene. The Los Angeles Fire Department arrived with specialized equipment to drain the tank and recover Elisa's body. The process took hours, with news helicopters circling overhead and reporters gathering on the street below. The world watched as the tragic conclusion to Elisa's story unfolded on live television. The discovery raised immediate and troubling questions. How had Elisa's body ended up in a water tank on the roof of the hotel? How had she accessed the rooftop, which was supposedly secured? How had she climbed the tall water tank, removed the heavy lid, and gotten inside? And perhaps most disturbing, how long had she been in the tank, and how many hotel guests had been using water that contained her decomposing remains? The autopsy would take months to complete, delayed by the complexity of the case and the condition of Elisa's body after spending weeks submerged in water. The Los Angeles County Coroner's Office conducted extensive tests looking for any signs of trauma, sexual assault, drugs, or other factors that might explain her death. They examined every inch of her body for defensive wounds, injuries, or evidence of a struggle. In the meantime, more details about Elisa's background began to emerge. Her family revealed that Elisa had been diagnosed with bipolar disorder and depression, conditions she had been managing with medication. She was a student at the University of British Columbia, studying to become a fashion designer. Those who knew her described her as creative, intelligent, and friendly, someone who loved to write and share her thoughts through her blog. Elisa's blog posts from the weeks before her death painted a picture of someone struggling with mental health challenges, but trying to find hope and meaning in her life. She wrote candidly about her experiences with depression, about the difficulty of maintaining relationships when dealing with mental illness, and about her desire to see the world and create something meaningful with her life. Her final posts from Los Angeles showed a young woman who was excited about her journey, but also seemed to be dealing with significant internal struggles. Friends and family members were interviewed extensively by police. They confirmed that Elisa had been taking several medications for her conditions, including mood stabilizers and antidepressants. However, they also noted that Elisa sometimes struggled with medication compliance, occasionally stopping her medications when she felt better or when side effects became difficult to manage. This was a crucial piece of information that would factor heavily into the final determination of her cause of death. The toxicology reports, when they finally came back, showed that Elisa had her prescribed medications in her system, but the levels were lower than expected based on her prescribed dosages. This suggested she may not have been taking her medications consistently in the days leading up to her death. Importantly, the tests found no evidence of alcohol or recreational drugs in her system. Whatever had caused her unusual behavior in the elevator, it wasn't the result of intoxication by common substances. The coroner's office also examined the physical evidence from the water tank. They noted that the tank's access hatch, while heavy, could be lifted by one person from the inside. The ladder leading up to the tank was accessible from the rooftop. There was no evidence of forced entry to the roof access door, though, as investigators had learned, that door was often left propped open or could be bypassed. Crucially, there was no evidence of trauma to Elisa's body consistent with a struggle or assault. No defensive wounds, no signs of being forcibly held or restrained, no indications of violence. In June 2013, 4 months after Elisa's body was discovered, the Los Angeles County Coroner's Office released their findings. The official cause of death was listed as accidental drowning, with bipolar disorder noted as a significant contributing factor. The coroner's report suggested that Elisa had likely experienced a manic episode or psychotic break, possibly exacerbated by not taking her medications consistently, which led her to access the hotel's rooftop, climb into the water tank, and ultimately drown. The report attempted to explain the physical logistics of how this could have happened. According to their reconstruction, Elisa likely accessed the rooftop through the alarmed door, which evidence suggested wasn't functioning properly at the time. She climbed the ladder to the water tank, removed or partially removed the heavy lid, which investigators found wasn't completely closed, and entered the tank. Once inside, either she couldn't lift the lid to get out, or she became disoriented in the water and drowned before she could escape. The coroner noted that the tank was difficult to climb out of from the inside, especially if someone was in a state of mental distress or panic. But for many people following the case, this explanation raised more questions than it answered. Why would someone experiencing a mental health crisis specifically choose to climb into a water tank? How did Elisa, a young woman of small stature, manage to lift the heavy lid of the water tank, which some reports claimed weighed 50 to 70 pounds? If she accessed the roof through an alarmed door, why didn't hotel security respond to the alarm? And most puzzling of all, what explained her bizarre behavior in the elevator? The internet's amateur detectives refused to accept the official explanation. They continued to analyze every aspect of the case, developing alternative theories that ranged from plausible to wildly conspiratorial. Some believed Elisa had been murdered, her body placed in the water tank by her killer to hide the evidence. They pointed to the fact that her clothing was found in the tank with her, suggesting someone else had undressed her. Others argued that the coroner's office was covering up a more sinister truth, perhaps to protect the hotel or avoid tourism damage to Los Angeles. Retired police officers and criminal psychologists weighed in on the case through news interviews and online forums. Many supported the coroner's findings, explaining that people experiencing severe mental health crises often engage in behavior that seems illogical to outside observers, but makes sense within the distorted reality they're experiencing at the time. They cited examples of other cases where individuals with bipolar disorder or schizophrenia had climbed into dangerous or confined spaces during manic or psychotic episodes. Dr. Philip Resnick, a professor of psychiatry who reviewed the case, explained in media interviews that Elisa's behavior in the elevator was consistent with someone experiencing a psychotic episode. The apparent hiding from an unseen threat, the talking to people who weren't there, the unusual hand gestures. All of these behaviors could be explained by auditory and visual hallucinations, paranoid delusions, or disorganized thinking associated with severe mental illness. He noted that it was tragically common for people in such states to put themselves in danger without realizing it. Mental health advocates used Elisa's case to draw attention to the challenges faced by people living with bipolar disorder and other mental illnesses. They emphasized that Elisa's death was a tragedy, not a mystery, and that sensationalizing her case risked stigmatizing mental health conditions. They pointed out that medication non-compliance is a significant issue in treating bipolar disorder, often due to side effects, denial of illness during manic phases, or simply feeling well and believing medication is no longer necessary. When someone stops taking their medications, especially mood stabilizers, the risk of severe manic or psychotic episodes increases dramatically. Elisa's family, devastated by their loss, eventually filed a wrongful death lawsuit against the Cecil Hotel, alleging that inadequate security and maintenance contributed to her death. They argued that the hotel had a responsibility to ensure that dangerous areas like the rooftop were properly secured and that the water tanks should have been locked or made inaccessible to prevent exactly this kind of tragedy. The lawsuit detailed the hotel's troubled history and suggested a pattern of negligence. The case was eventually settled out of court for an undisclosed amount. The Cecil Hotel, which had already been struggling with its dark reputation and declining business, continued to deteriorate. Over the following years, the building underwent multiple ownership changes and renovation attempts, eventually being purchased with plans to convert it into affordable housing. The tragic notoriety of Elisa Lam's death had cemented the Cecil's status as one of America's most infamous hotels. But the questions surrounding Elisa's death persisted. The elevator video, in particular, remained a source of endless fascination and debate. Experts in body language and psychology offered interpretations of her movements. Some suggested she might have been playing a game, perhaps recreating something she'd seen online or testing out the elevator ritual that conspiracy theorists had connected to her case. Others believed she was simply trying to make the elevator work, frustrated that the doors wouldn't close, and that her unusual gestures were nothing more than expressions of that frustration captured in a way that looked eerie due to the low-quality surveillance footage. One detail that many amateur investigators fixated on was the elevator's behavior. Why didn't the doors close when Elisa pushed the buttons? Why did they remain open for so long? Elevator experts explained that most elevators are programmed to keep their doors open if they detect an obstruction or if the door close button is repeatedly pressed, which can override the normal closing mechanism. Additionally, if someone is standing in the doorway or if the elevator's sensors detect movement in the entry area, the doors will remain open. Elisa's movements in and out of the elevator could have triggered these safety features, explaining the unusual door behavior without requiring any supernatural explanation. The discussion of Elisa's case also highlighted the double-edged nature of viral internet investigations. On one hand, the public attention kept pressure on authorities to thoroughly investigate her disappearance and ensured her story wouldn't be forgotten. The widespread sharing of her photo and the elevator video potentially helped gather witnesses and information. On the other hand, the proliferation of unfounded theories, some of which portrayed Elisa as involved in occult activities or suggested she had brought her fate upon herself, caused additional pain to her grieving family and friends. Several people who stayed at the Cecil Hotel around the time of Elisa's death came forward with their own stories, some adding fuel to the mystery. One guest reported hearing strange sounds from the upper floors late at night, though these were never verified. Another claimed to have seen a young Asian woman on the hotel roof days before Elisa's body was discovered, though this sighting was never confirmed and could have been a false memory influenced by subsequent news coverage. Several guests who had unknowingly used water from the contaminated tank reported feeling sick in the days before the discovery, though health officials later stated that the water, while certainly contaminated, had been diluted enough by the other tanks and the plumbing system that serious illness was unlikely. The parallels drawn between Elisa's case and the movie Dark Water remained a source of speculation for many. In the film, a young girl drowns in a water tank on a building's roof, and her spirit haunts the building through the water system. The similarities were striking, leading some to suggest that Elisa might have seen the movie and, in a state of mental distress, somehow recreated its events. Others believed the similarities were purely coincidental, pointing out that water tanks on urban building roofs are common, and drownings in such tanks, while rare, have occurred in other cases with no connection to the film. Paranormal investigators descended on the Cecil Hotel in the years following Elisa's death, conducting overnight investigations and claiming to capture evidence of supernatural activity. Various ghost hunting shows featured the hotel, with investigators using electronic equipment to detect supposed spiritual presences. These shows typically presented Elisa's story as evidence that the hotel was cursed or haunted, conveniently ignoring the more mundane but thoroughly documented explanations for her death. The hotel's owners, despite the negative publicity, seemed to accept this dark tourism as a source of revenue, at least until public pressure and changing ownership forced a different approach. Mental health professionals continued to use Elisa's case as a teaching example, both for understanding the serious risks associated with untreated or inadequately managed bipolar disorder, and for discussing the importance of consistent medication use and regular psychiatric care. They noted that Elisa's case was particularly tragic because she was clearly trying to manage her conditions, seeking treatment, and attempting to live a full life. Her decision to travel alone, while ultimately fatal, was not irrational or irresponsible. Many people with bipolar disorder travel successfully, and Elisa had no way of knowing that this particular trip would end in disaster. The question of how Elisa managed to lift the heavy water tank lid remained a sticking point for skeptics of the official explanation. However, subsequent investigations revealed that the lid's weight had been exaggerated in some reports, and that during a manic episode, individuals can display unusual strength and persistence in accomplishing physical tasks that would normally seem difficult. Additionally, the lid didn't need to be completely removed for someone to enter the tank. It could be partially lifted and propped open, or someone could squeeze through a partial opening. Footage from other security cameras in the hotel, which was not released to the public but was reviewed by investigators, reportedly showed Elisa in other areas of the hotel in the days before her death, sometimes appearing agitated or confused. Staff members reported that she had been acting strangely, though none of their observations suggested she was in immediate danger. No footage ever captured anyone following her or interacting with her in a threatening manner. No evidence of any other person being on the roof at the time she accessed the water tanks was ever found. The LAPD closed the case, satisfied with the coroner's findings and confident that no foul play had occurred. But they also acknowledged the tragedy of the situation and the pain it had caused Elisa's family. Detective Michael Hansen, who worked on the case, later stated in interviews that he believed the evidence clearly pointed to an accident resulting from a mental health crisis, and that while the case had unusual elements, it wasn't actually mysterious when all the facts were considered together. He expressed frustration with the conspiracy theories that continued to circulate, believing they disrespected Elisa's memory and her family's grief. Years after her death, Elisa's blog posts remain online, a poignant record of a young woman's thoughts, dreams, and struggles. In one particularly moving post written months before her trip to Los Angeles, she reflected on the challenges of living with mental illness and the fear that her conditions would define her entire life. She wrote about her determination to not let depression and bipolar disorder stop her from experiencing the world and pursuing her dreams. She expressed hope that through treatment and persistence, she could build the life she wanted. The tragedy of Elisa Lam's death extends beyond the circumstances of her final hours. It encompasses the loss of a promising young life, the anguish of a family who will never have complete answers about their daughter's final moments, and the harsh reality that mental illness remains misunderstood and stigmatized even as awareness grows. Her case also demonstrates how the internet age can transform a personal tragedy into a global spectacle, with both positive and negative consequences. In 2021, Netflix released a documentary series called Crime Scene: The Vanishing at the Cecil Hotel, which re-examined Elisa's case and the hotel's dark history. The series featured interviews with investigators, hotel residents, and internet sleuths who had become obsessed with the case. While the documentary ultimately supported the accidental death conclusion, it also explored how internet communities had developed elaborate alternative theories and, in some cases, harassed innocent people they suspected of involvement in Elisa's death. The series sparked renewed interest in the case, but also criticism for potentially exploiting a tragedy for entertainment. Mental health organizations used the renewed attention to advocate for better resources and support for people with bipolar disorder and other mental illnesses. They emphasized that Elisa's death could potentially have been prevented with better support systems, consistent medication management, and perhaps a travel companion who could have recognized signs of an emerging crisis. They also stressed that people with mental illness shouldn't be discouraged from living full lives out of fear, but rather should be equipped with proper resources and support networks. The story of what happened at the Cecil Hotel in February 2013 will likely never be fully understood in all its details. The exact sequence of events that led Elisa to that rooftop, the specific thoughts going through her mind as she climbed into the water tank, the moments before she realized she couldn't get out, these details died with her. What remains is a framework of facts, some video footage, forensic evidence, and medical expertise that together paint a picture of a tragic accident born from a mental health crisis. But the human need for narrative, for stories that make sense and provide closure, struggles with this kind of ambiguity. We want to believe that deaths have clear causes and meanings, that we can identify specific villains or supernatural forces, that random tragedy doesn't just happen to young people with their whole lives ahead of them. The elevation of Elisa's case to the status of unsolved mystery reflects this discomfort with accepting that sometimes terrible things happen without sinister explanations, that mental illness can be fatal, and that a combination of circumstances can align to create a tragedy that no one could have predicted or prevented. If you've watched this far, you've journeyed through one of the most discussed cases in recent internet history, and you've seen how a tragic death became a viral sensation, transformed into entertainment, and ultimately sparked important conversations about mental health, internet culture, and the fine line between healthy curiosity and harmful obsession. Consider subscribing to stay informed about more cases like this, and leave a comment sharing your thoughts on how we as a society can better support mental health while also respecting the dignity of those who've passed. The Cecil Hotel, now largely empty and awaiting conversion, stands as a monument to decades of tragedy. Elisa Lam's death was neither the first nor the last to occur within its walls, but it remains the most famous, the most analyzed, and perhaps the most misunderstood. Her elevator video has been watched millions of times by people across the globe, each viewer interpreting her movements through their own lens of understanding, fear, or fascination. What gets lost in the theories and speculation is the reality of Elisa herself as a person, beyond the mystery. She was a daughter, a friend, a student with hopes and plans for her future. She loved fashion and writing. She struggled with her mental health but worked hard to manage it. She wanted to see the world. She was 21 years old, the same age as countless young people traveling, exploring, and trying to figure out who they are and who they want to become. The real mystery of Elisa Lam's death isn't what happened in those final hours at the Cecil Hotel. The medical examiner, the police investigators, and the forensic evidence provide a reasonably clear picture of the tragic sequence of events. The real mystery is why her story resonated so deeply with so many people, why millions were compelled to watch that elevator footage over and over, searching for clues that weren't there, developing theories that grew increasingly elaborate. Perhaps it's because her case touched on so many of our collective fears. The fear of traveling alone and something going wrong. The fear of mental illness, either in ourselves or our loved ones, and not knowing how to manage it. The fear of hotels, especially old ones with dark histories, and what might happen behind closed doors. The fear of death itself, particularly unexpected death that comes for the young and seemingly healthy. Elisa's case became a canvas onto which people projected their own anxieties, and the ambiguous elevator footage provided just enough mystery to keep those projections alive. The internet's response to Elisa's case also revealed something about our contemporary relationship with tragedy and entertainment. The same platforms that allowed her family to spread awareness of her disappearance also turned her death into content, something to be consumed, analyzed, and debated by people with no personal connection to her or her family. The line between true crime interest and voyeuristic entertainment blurred, and Elisa's humanity sometimes got lost in the process. For her family, the years since her death have been marked by grief, complicated by public speculation. They've had to watch as their daughter's worst moments, captured on surveillance video, were dissected by strangers. They've seen conspiracy theories that implicitly or explicitly blamed Elisa for her own death, suggesting she was involved in occult activities or had brought some kind of curse upon herself. They've had to relive their trauma with each new documentary, YouTube video, or podcast that examines the case. Yet there's also been some positive outcome from the attention. Elisa's case has raised awareness about the seriousness of bipolar disorder and the importance of mental health treatment. It's sparked conversations about hotel security and responsibility. It's demonstrated the power of viral social media in spreading information about missing persons. And it's shown how online communities, when properly directed, can provide support and resources to families dealing with similar tragedies. The lessons from Elisa Lam's death extend beyond the specific circumstances of her case. They remind us of the importance of regular mental health care, consistent medication management, and having support systems in place, especially when traveling or in potentially stressful situations. They demonstrate the need for better security in hotels, particularly regarding access to dangerous areas like rooftops and mechanical systems. They highlight how vulnerable people can be when they're alone in unfamiliar environments. For those who live with bipolar disorder or other mental health conditions, Elisa's story is both tragic and cautionary. It underscores the very real dangers that can arise during manic episodes or psychotic breaks, when perception becomes distorted and judgment impaired. It shows why medication compliance matters, why regular contact with mental health professionals is crucial, and why having people who can recognize warning signs and intervene is potentially life-saving. The Cecil Hotel's dark history, of which Elisa's death is now an indelible part, also raises questions about places and their role in tragedy. Is there something about certain locations that attracts darkness, or is it simply that some places, through a combination of circumstances like location in high-poverty areas, cheap rates that attract desperate people, and age-related deterioration, become statistical anomalies where bad things happen more frequently? The Cecil's location in Skid Row, one of America's largest homeless populations, meant it served a community facing mental health crises, addiction, and desperation. In that context, the tragedies that occurred there become more understandable, if no less sad. The transformation of downtown Los Angeles in the years since Elisa's death has been dramatic. The area around the Cecil has seen gentrification, new development, and changing demographics. The hotel itself, slated for conversion to affordable housing, may finally serve a purpose that helps rather than harms its community. But the memories of what happened there, the lives lost within those walls, remain part of the building's legacy. As we reflect on the bizarre death of Elisa Lam, we're forced to confront uncomfortable truths about mental illness, about how quickly a situation can go from normal to tragic, and about how little control we sometimes have over the circumstances of our lives. We're reminded that behind every viral video, every true crime case that captures public attention, there are real people suffering real loss. If this story has affected you, if you've found yourself drawn into the mystery and speculation surrounding Elisa's death, take a moment to consider what that says about our culture's relationship with tragedy and entertainment. Consider how you might support mental health awareness in your own community. Consider being more understanding of those struggling with mental illness, recognizing that conditions like bipolar disorder are serious medical issues, not character flaws or choices. And if you know someone traveling alone, especially someone managing mental health challenges, reach out, check in, make sure they have support systems in place. Encourage them to stay connected with family and mental health providers. The simple act of regular contact might make a difference in a moment of crisis. The story of Elisa Lam reminds us that life is fragile, that circumstances can change in an instant, and that every person's story deserves to be told with respect and dignity, not just sensationalized for entertainment. Her death was a tragedy, not a mystery. A young woman experiencing a mental health crisis made her way to a hotel rooftop and couldn't escape from a water tank. The explanation is heartbreaking in its simplicity and randomness. As this account comes to a close, think about sharing your perspective in the comments below. And if you found this deep dive into one of the internet's most discussed cases valuable, hit that like button and subscribe for more thoughtful explorations of cases that deserve careful, respectful analysis. Let Elisa's story be a reminder of the importance of mental health awareness, the power of compassion, and the need to see the humanity in every story, no matter how it's been sensationalized or mythologized. The truth about what happened at the Cecil Hotel may never satisfy those looking for elaborate conspiracies or supernatural explanations. But the truth, tragic as it is, honors Elisa Lam more than any mystery ever could. She was a real person who faced real challenges, and her death, while occurring in bizarre circumstances, was ultimately the result of a disease that remains poorly understood and inadequately treated in our society. Let her legacy be one that promotes better understanding, better treatment, and better support for those living with mental illness. That would be a far better memorial than any amount of speculation or sensationalism could ever provide.